The Vorak fleet dropped out of hyperspace, their massive warships looming over Earth like steel predators. Their commander, High Warlord Krovek, stood tall on the bridge of the Dominator, his crimson eyes scanning the blue-green planet below. "This is the best target the High Council could find," he sneered. "A world with no planetary defenses, no orbital fleet." The Vorak Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their empire stretched across the stars, built on war and absolute dominance. When they had first heard of Earth, they assumed it was just another weak prey, another planet to add to their collection. Krovak turned to his second-in-command, Captain Sorlin. "Have the humans responded to our demands?" Sorlin smirked, his sharp fangs glinting under the bridge's red lights. "No response, Warlord. Their leaders are either cowards or fools." Krovak growled in amusement. "Then we will show them their place." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a system-wide broadcast. Let all of Earth hear my words." The Vorak officer pressed a control panel, and Krovak stepped forward. His voice boomed across every human device: televisions, radios, communication satellites, and even military frequencies. "People of Earth, I am High Warlord Krovak of the Vorak Dominion. You are now under our rule. Surrender immediately, and we will allow some of you to serve us. Resist, and we will burn your world to the ground." He paused, waiting for a response. Silence. Krovak frowned. Strange. Most species panic. They beg. They plead. But these humans... He tapped his claw against his console. "They don't even seem afraid. Perhaps they are too primitive to understand their situation," Sorlin suggested. Krovak grinned. "Then we will teach them." He turned back to the fleet. "Begin the invasion. Deploy ground forces. Make them kneel." From the massive warships, Vorak drop pods rained down like fire from the heavens. Their sleek black shapes pierced the clouds, screaming toward Earth's surface. Each carried elite Vorak warriors, heavily armed and eager for battle. On board the Dominator, Krovak watched as the first wave landed in major human cities: New York, Beijing, Moscow, London, Tokyo. He leaned forward, waiting to hear the screams of surrender. But instead, the reports coming in were unexpected. "Warlord, the humans are resisting." Krovak chuckled. "Of course they are. Every species resists at first. It will not last." The communications officer swallowed. "No, Warlord, you don't understand. The humans, they were waiting for us." Krovak's grin faded. "Explain." "Sir, they didn't panic. They didn't run. They fought back." The screens flickered to life, showing battlefield footage from Vorak forces. And what Krovak saw made his blood run cold. Humans were fighting like no species he had ever seen before. Vorak warriors landed in New York, expecting an easy battle. Instead, they were met with snipers on rooftops, explosives planted in the streets, and heavily armed human soldiers waiting in every building. Ambush after ambush shredded Vorak squads before they could react. In Moscow, Vorak forces tried to take control of the city, but humans used the environment to their advantage, trapping Vorak in narrow streets, cutting off their supply lines, using guerrilla tactics. They fought with strategy, with patience, with lethal precision. In Tokyo, Vorak troops stormed the city, expecting civilians to flee in terror. Instead, they found organized resistance fighters, well-armed and trained. Even civilians joined the battle, using everything from homemade weapons to stolen Vorak guns. Everywhere the Vorak landed, they suffered heavy losses. Krovak slammed his fist against the console. "This is impossible. They have no fleet, no planetary shields. How are they?" Then the alarms on the Dominator began to blare. "Warning! Enemy fleet detected." Krovak's eyes widened. "What fleet? The humans have no space force." He turned toward the viewports and saw the truth. A human fleet had emerged from the dark side of the moon. They had been hiding, waiting. The ships were smaller than Vorak warships, but they moved with terrifying speed. They did not charge in like fools. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, striking at Vorak supply ships, targeting weak points. One Vorak cruiser exploded as a human fighter squadron tore through its engines. Another ship was disabled instantly. A human cyber attack had shut down its systems. Krovak's claws dug into the console. They planned this. They let us come here, thinking we had the advantage. For the first time in his life, he felt doubt. Sorlin's voice was shaky. "Warlord, we need to retreat. This is not a battle. It's a trap." Krovak's eyes burned with rage. "No, we are the Vorak Dominion. We do not run." But as another warship erupted into flames outside the viewport, he knew the truth. This was no ordinary war. They had invaded a world unlike any other. And for the first time, they were the ones who were outmatched. High Warlord Krovak clenched his fists as the battlefield reports poured in. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Vorak Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had crushed rebellions before they even began. No species had ever fought back like this. Yet here they were, losing. The human fleet, which they had not even detected before the invasion, was now tearing through their ships with ruthless efficiency. Krovak had assumed the battle in space would be over in minutes. Instead, it had become a slaughter, but not in the Vorak's favor. "Commander," a Vorak officer turned to him, panic in his voice. "We've lost 5 capital ships already. Their attack patterns, they're hitting our supply lines, our communication relays, our weak points. They're not fighting like an empire. They're fighting like predators." Krovak gritted his teeth. This wasn't war, not the way the Vorak fought it. This was something else. Down on the planet, things were even worse. The Vorak had expected the humans to break the moment they saw Vorak warriors marching through their cities. Instead, humans had prepared for them. Reports from New York described snipers taking down Vorak officers before ground troops could even advance. Vorak soldiers moving through the streets were suddenly ambushed from above, humans striking from rooftops and then vanishing like ghosts. Explosions rocked their transports as mines and traps had been waiting beneath the roads. In London, Vorak shock troops landed in force, expecting to secure the city in hours. Instead, they found barricades, makeshift defenses, and heavily armed resistance fighters. They fought in shadows, striking fast, disappearing before the Vorak could react. In Moscow, Vorak forces found themselves being hunted. Their patrols would leave and never return. Vorak corpses were found in alleys, their weapons missing, their bodies riddled with precise gunfire. And the worst part, the Vorak warriors were supposed to be stronger, faster. But somehow, humans fought with a different kind of strength, one that the Vorak had never encountered before. They fought with strategy, with patience, with sheer merciless will. Krovak slammed his claws against the control panel, his voice shaking with rage. Why are they still standing? Why are they not surrendering? Captain Torlin hesitated before answering. His usual arrogance was gone. "Sir, I think they don't know how." Krovak turned to face him, his crimson eyes narrowing. "What?" Torlin swallowed. "They were never going to surrender. I have reviewed the history files. Humans have fought each other for thousands of years. They have lived in war, survived disasters, endured horrors that would have broken other species. To them, this is just another battlefield." The warlord stared at him, his claws tightening. The idea sickened him. No species enjoyed war. War was a means to an end. Power, control, dominion. But these humans, they didn't just fight war. They understood it. They thrived in it. And that made them dangerous. Before Krovak could respond, a new alarm blared across the bridge. "Incoming transmission, Warlord." The communications officer's voice was tense. "It's from the humans." Krovak's jaw tightened. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and the face of a human general appeared. He was old, his face lined with experience, his cold eyes like steel. He wore no armor, no war paint, just a simple uniform with a flag Krovac did not recognize. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 1,000 wars. High Warlord Krovac. The human's tone was calm, almost disappointed. Krovac snarled, "You should surrender now, human. Your world belongs to the Vorak Dominion." The human tilted his head slightly. Then he did something no species had ever done in the face of Vorak conquest. He laughed. It was a quiet, knowing sound. Not fear, not desperation. Something else. "You really don't understand what you've done to you." Krovac's claws dug into the console. "You are outnumbered, outgunned. You have no planetary defenses, no fleet strong enough to challenge us. And yet, you think you have a chance." The human's smile disappeared. His voice, when he spoke again, was cold as death. "You think this is about chance. You think we're fighting to win. No, Warlord. We're fighting to make sure you lose." For the first time, Krovac felt something unfamiliar. It was not anger. It was not arrogance. It was fear. The transmission cut off, and before Krovac could process it, a new alert sounded. "Warlord, multiple Vorak ships are going dark. Systems failing." Krovac turned to the screen. Dozens of Vorak warships were collapsing, falling out of formation, their weapons shutting down, their engines flickering. What is happening?" A Vorak officer's voice was shaking. "Sir, the humans, they've infiltrated our systems. They're hacking our ships." Krovac's breath caught. "That's impossible. We have the most advanced security systems in the galaxy." Sorlin's voice was hollow. Apparently, not advanced enough. The Vorak fleet was unraveling. Ships disabled. Weapons offline. Supply routes cut off. And the human fleet, still coming. Krovac gripped the edge of the console, his mind racing. They had underestimated this species. And now, it was too late. The trap had closed. And the Vorak were the ones caught in it. Krovac stood frozen as the bridge of the Dominator filled with the sounds of alarms and panicked reports. The Vorak fleet, his fleet, was unraveling before his eyes. "Sir," the communications officer's voice was shaking. "The humans have hacked our systems. They're disabling ships faster than we can counteract." Krovac's claws dug into the console. "How? No species has ever been able to break through Vorak cyber defenses." Captain Sorlin's voice was grim. "It's not just hacking, Warlord. They planned this. They waited for us to commit to the invasion. Let us drop our forces onto their planet. And now, they're cutting us apart." The main screen flickered, showing human ships moving like predators among prey. Unlike Vorak warships, designed for direct combat, overwhelming firepower, and brute force, the human ships moved with precision. They didn't charge in foolishly. They struck where it hurt. A Vorak destroyer exploded, its reactor breached by a single well-placed torpedo. A cruiser spun out of control, its systems completely shut down by a cyber attack. Even the largest warships, the ones Krovac had believed to be invincible, were being hunted down one by one. "This is madness," Krovac growled. "The humans should not have this kind of technology. Their fleet was supposed to be weak." Sorlin's expression darkened. "Warlord, I think we made a mistake." Krovac turned to him, his eyes burning. "What mistake?" Sorlin hesitated, then spoke the words that no Vorak had ever dared to say before. "We assumed they were weak because they never expanded, because they never conquered. But Warlord, what if their strength was never in their fleets?" Krovac's stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" Sorlin exhaled sharply. "Humans are not conquerors. They are survivors. They don't fight for expansion. They fight to end wars before they begin. And the moment we challenged them, the moment we forced them into war." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Krovac already knew. The Vorak had been fighting this war the wrong way. They had expected fear, surrender, desperation. But humans didn't fight like prey. They fought like cornered beasts. And nothing in the galaxy was more dangerous than a species with nothing left to lose. The Dominator shuddered violently, pulling Krovac's attention back to the battle. Status: direct hit from enemy railgun fire. An officer reported. Shields failing. Krovac cursed under his breath. Return fire. Focus on their flagship. But as soon as the Dominator's cannons charged, they shut down. A chill ran through Krovac's veins. What just happened? The weapons officer's eyes widened. Sir, they disabled our guns. Krovac spun toward Sorlin. How? Our systems are isolated. Sorlin's jaw clenched. Not isolated enough. Krovac's claws trembled as he watched the battle unfold. The Vorak fleet was collapsing. And the worst part, this wasn't even a war anymore. This was an execution. On the surface of Earth, the ground war was going just as badly for the Vorak. Vorak soldiers had expected easy conquest. They had expected humans to scatter and beg. Instead, they had dug in, adapted, and turned entire cities into war zones. In New York, Vorak forces found themselves isolated, trapped in a maze of urban warfare. Every alley, every ruined building was a death trap. Snipers picked them off one by one. Mines devastated their transport vehicles. The humans didn't fight head-on. They struck fast, then disappeared before retaliation. In London, the Vorak deployed heavy armor, massive war machines capable of tearing through walls and crushing enemy soldiers. But the humans didn't fight them head-on. They set ambushes, rigged explosives, and cut off supply lines. Vorak tanks rolled forward, only to be blown apart from the sewers below. In Moscow, Vorak squads were being hunted like prey. Human resistance forces had adapted to their tactics shockingly fast. Vorak patrols would move into abandoned buildings, only to never come out again. One Vorak officer, bleeding from a gunshot wound, sent a desperate transmission back to his fleet. Command, please respond. We are surrounded. The humans are. They're everywhere. They don't sleep. They don't stop. The transmission cut off, replaced by static. Back on the Dominator. Krovac's breathing was ragged. His unstoppable fleet was burning in front of him. His ground forces were being slaughtered. And then, a new transmission came through. A human's voice. Warlord Krovac. Krovac's fists clenched. Who is this? The screen flickered, revealing the same human general from before. I told you, Warlord. The human's voice was calm. Cold. We weren't fighting to win. His eyes hardened. We were fighting to make sure you lost. Krovac's blood ran cold. This was never a battle. This was never about defense. This had been a trap from the very beginning. Sir, an officer yelled, our forces are in full retreat. We've lost over 60% of our ships. The humans are pushing us out of the system. Krovac's breath came in short, ragged gasps. No, no. The great Vorak Dominion, the empire that had never lost, was losing. And for the first time, Krovac understood why. The Vorak had fought for dominance. But humans fought for survival. And that made them the deadliest enemy in the galaxy. The Dominator shuddered again as another human warship unleashed a devastating volley of railgun fire, tearing through its weakened hull. Sparks flew across the bridge, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air. Panic had spread among the Vorak officers. Krovac could hear the desperate reports. Ships destroyed, weapons disabled, ground forces slaughtered. This was no longer a battle. This was a massacre. Sir, we have to retreat. Sorlin shouted, gripping the console for support as the ship lurched again. The fleet is breaking apart. If we don't fall back now, we'll lose everything. Krovac's claws scraped against the control panel, his mind racing. How had this happened? The Vorak Dominion had never lost a war. They had conquered countless worlds, shattered entire civilizations without resistance. And yet, this one species, these primitive humans, had turned the tide in mere hours. It wasn't just their technology. It wasn't just their strategy. It was something deeper, something terrifying. Krovak clenched his jaw. Order a full retreat. All remaining ships fall back to the outer rim. Now, the bridge officers scrambled to send the order, but just as they did, the main screen flickered, and the human general appeared again. His expression was calm. Too calm. "Leaving so soon, Warlord?" the human asked, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. Krovak snarled. "You think you've won. We will regroup. We will come back with a force even greater than this. You cannot stop the Vorak Dominion." The human tilted his head slightly. "You still don't understand, do you?" Krovak's claws tightened into fists. "Understand what?" The human general leaned forward, his cold eyes like steel. "You didn't just start a war, Warlord. You started a war with us. And we don't fight like you do." A sinking feeling twisted in Krovak's stomach. "What are you talking about?" The human's lips curled into a slight, humorless smile. "You think this ends with your retreat?" He shook his head. "No, Warlord. This is just the beginning." Before Krovak could respond, a new alarm blared. "Sir!" an officer shouted. Massive human fleet detected at the edge of the system. Krovak's breath caught in his throat. "That's impossible. Where did they come from?" Another officer's voice trembled. "They must have been waiting. Hiding. We were so focused on Earth, we didn't see them closing in." On the screen, new warships emerged from the darkness of space. These weren't the same ones the Vorak had fought before. These were bigger, stronger, heavily armed. And they weren't moving defensively anymore. They were advancing. The human general's voice was cold as death. "You thought this was just another war. But to us, this is survival. And we don't let our enemies survive." The screen cut out, and the full wrath of humanity came crashing down. The bridge of the Dominator was in chaos. Red warning lights bathed everything in a bloody glow. Alarms shrieked, and the voices of terrified Vorak officers overlapped in a storm of panic. Human warships were everywhere. They hadn't just been defending Earth. They had been waiting. They had let the Vorak believe they had the upper hand, let them commit their fleets, their armies, only to strike when they were too deep to escape. Krovak could barely breathe as he watched the tactical display. The human fleet wasn't just attacking. They were surrounding them. This is a trap," Krovak snarled. "They planned this from the beginning." Sorlin's face was ashen. "We walked right into it, Warlord. We are the prey now." A new transmission flashed onto the main screen. The same human general, standing calm and unshaken. "You wanted war, Warlord." His voice was deathly cold. "Now you'll see what that really means." The screen flickered, and the attack began. The battle that changed the galaxy. The first wave of human missiles tore through the Vorak fleet like a predator ripping into its prey. Entire battleships detonated in massive fireballs, their shields shattered in seconds. Railgun rounds, moving at terrifying speeds, punched through Vorak armor like it was paper. Their own weapons wouldn't fire. The humans had hacked them completely. One by one, Vorak warships went silent, dead in space. Some were left drifting, their crews trapped inside, helpless as the human ships picked them apart. Others exploded instantly, their reactors overloading from precision strikes. Krovak's breathing turned ragged. "This can't be happening." A voice crackled over the failing communication system. A Vorak admiral from another battleship. "Warlord, our fleet it's falling apart. We need orders." Krovak gritted his teeth. "Retreat. All remaining ships, fall back to the outer rim." But then, a new horror unfolded. Human ships began deploying strange pods. At first, Krovac thought they were more missiles, until the pods latched onto Vorak vessels. Then, the screaming began. The Vorak bridge officers stiffened as their comm channels filled with the panicked cries of their own soldiers. "They're boarding us. They're inside the ship. They don't stop. They don't fear death. Close the blast doors." "No. THUYRE. Already HER." The signal cut off. Krovac's claws dug into the metal of his chair. Human boarding teams. They weren't just destroying Vorak ships. They were taking them. Sorlin's voice was barely above a whisper. "Warlord, we aren't fighting an army. We're fighting something far worse." Krovac turned, his eyes burning. "What are you saying?" Sorlin's throat worked, as if forcing the words out hurt. "They are Deathworlders." And then, the final blow came. The last order. "Warlord," an officer screamed. "The humans, they are coming for us." Through the smoke and flashing emergency lights, Krovac could see them. A human ship. Dark, massive, its hull scarred by battles, but still standing strong, was heading straight for them. A message appeared on the screen. 4 words: "Surrender or be erased." Silence fell over the bridge. Every Vorak officer turned to Krovac. For the first time in his life, Krovac felt true fear. He had led his people into a war they could not win. Now he had one choice left: to fight and die, or to kneel before the humans. He closed his eyes and made his decision. Smoke filled the bridge of the Dominator, the once mighty Vorak warship now reduced to a crippled husk. The red emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the remaining officers. Krovac stood frozen, his claws tightening against the metal console as he watched the tactical display. His fleet was gone. The Vorak Dominion's proud warships, the very foundation of their power, were nothing but wreckage drifting through the void. Some still burned, oxygen leaking from shattered hulls, their crews either dead or fighting losing battles against human boarding parties. The Vorak had invaded Earth believing it would be another easy conquest, another world to add to their growing empire. Instead, they had awoken a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity had not only crushed their offensive, but had lured them into a death trap, an ambush so precise, so ruthless, that Krovac could barely comprehend how his people had been so blind. The sounds of battle echoed through the failing communication systems, desperate cries of Vorak soldiers overwhelmed by unstoppable human forces. The humans didn't just fight with superior technology. They fought like creatures born from war itself. Their soldiers, Deathworlders, moved with brutal efficiency, adapting to the Vorak's every attempt to push them back. They fought in the tight corridors of boarded ships with an unshakable determination, using weapons that fired projectiles too fast to react to, armor that absorbed energy blasts as if they were nothing. Vorak warriors, once feared across the stars, were being cut down like prey. There was no surrender, no mercy. The humans were sending a message. This was not just war. This was punishment. Krovac could feel his officers watching him, waiting for orders, waiting for hope. But there was none left. Even retreat was impossible. The humans had encircled what little remained of the Vorak fleet, their warships holding position like predators closing in for the kill. Every possible escape route had been cut off. Any vessel that tried to flee was instantly destroyed, torn apart by precise volleys of railgun fire or obliterated by high-yield missiles that left nothing behind but dust and debris. There was no path forward that didn't end in death. For the first time in his life, Krovac felt the crushing weight of defeat. The Vorak Dominion had ruled through terror, believing themselves to be the strongest species in the galaxy. But they had never faced a true apex predator before. A sharp tone rang out from the main display, and the screen shifted to reveal the human general once again. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held something far worse than anger: certainty. This man knew the war was over. He knew humanity had already won. His voice was steady, carrying the cold precision of a species that had decided the Vorak were no longer worth fearing. "This is your final warning," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "Surrender now, or your species will cease to exist." The word sent a ripple of tension through the bridge. Krovac could feel his officers shuddering, their rigid postures faltering. They had never imagined this moment, never believed the Vorak could be the ones begging for survival. And yet, here they were. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Krovac's claws trembled as he reached for the console, his pride battling against the inescapable truth. The Vorak dominion was finished. The war was lost, not because their weapons had failed, not because their fleets were weak, but because they had challenged the wrong enemy. The humans were not conquerors, they were something worse. They were survivors. And when a species like that was threatened, they didn't stop until the threat was gone. He exhaled slowly, his voice breaking as he spoke, the taste of the words bitter on his tongue. "We surrender." The bridge of the Dominator was silent, except for the distant echoes of battle still raging on the few remaining Vorak ships. Krovac stood motionless, his clawed hands trembling against the cold metal of his command console. The words had left his mouth, but they felt foreign, like they had been spoken by someone else. "We surrender." Never in his lifetime had the Vorak Dominion uttered those words to an enemy. Never had they imagined a day where they would be the ones brought to their knees. The transmission line remained open, and the human general on the screen did not react immediately. He simply studied Krovac with those cold, calculating eyes, as if measuring whether the Vorak leader truly understood the gravity of his defeat. Then, after a long pause, the general's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Wise choice, warlord." His voice carried no gloating, no cruelty, just the heavy weight of an unshakable certainty. Humanity had won. Outside, the remnants of the Vorak fleet drifted in the vast emptiness of space, crippled and surrounded. Some ships had already powered down their weapons, their crews abandoning the fight, desperate for survival. Others still resisted, their captains unwilling to accept the reality before them. But one by one, they fell silent. The war had been decided. The Vorak had been broken, and humanity had proven why they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Krovac clenched his jaw as he turned to his officers. Some still refused to meet his gaze, their pride too shattered, their spirits too crushed to acknowledge the reality of what had just happened. Others simply stood there in shock, unable to process that their empire, their unstoppable war machine, had been outmatched and dismantled in mere days. Krovac had always believed that victory belonged to the strongest. That was the Vorak way. Conquer, dominate, rule through fear. And yet here he stood, staring at a species that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about war. The humans had not fought for glory. They had not fought for conquest. They had fought like a species with nothing to lose. They had fought with the kind of unrelenting, merciless fury that only comes from a civilization that had faced extinction before and refused to die. The Vorak had underestimated them, treated them as nothing more than another race to be crushed beneath their boots. That arrogance had sealed their fate. The human general straightened slightly on the screen, his expression unreadable. "Your ships will stand down immediately. Your soldiers will surrender their weapons. Any act of defiance will be met with swift and absolute destruction." There was no threat in his voice, no need for one. The Vorak knew he meant every word. Krovac exhaled, his chest tightening with a pain he had never felt before. This was the end of the Vorak Dominion as they knew it. No one would fear them anymore. No one would cower before their war fleets. Their reign of terror was over. And as he gave the final order to his fleet, to power down their weapons and surrender completely, he knew that from this day forward, the galaxy would remember one undeniable truth. Humanity was not prey. They were not weak. They were not conquerors. They were something far worse. and the Vorak had made the fatal mistake of challenging them.